Are you struggling for consistency in your sim racing? Does your iRating look like a roller coaster? If so, we have good news for you. The way to get more consistent is to first understand what you're doing differently than the professionals. And VRS is the answer. With our competitive subscription, you will have the telemetry, setups, tutorials, and everything else you need to fully analyze your driving. Our data packs and the ability to compare your driving with the best in the world will show you exactly where to adjust your inputs, change your driving line, and shave seconds off of your lap times. And our powerful and precise Direct Force Pro wheelbase and precision pedals are being used by some of the world's best drivers. All these champions agree that VRS hardware is not just the best on the market, it's also priced well below the competition. So if you're looking to upgrade to direct drive and the best pedals in sim racing, VRS is your answer. If you want to get better, get faster, and make it happen sooner rather than later, you owe it to yourself to find out why so many people are switching to VRS. You'll be so glad that you did. Visit www.virtualracingschool.com and learn why the best use VRS.
Good evening, everybody. Welcome back to the S1 Racing GT3 Sprint Series here on Apex Racing TV. My name is Ron Mullins. Alongside me in the virtual commentary booth is Charles Bichelle, and in the virtual production hall we have our old friend Josh Wilkie. Now, we're past the halfway mark of this season, and right now it's really Season 2 champion Gregory Hovesen looking to seal the deal and go back-to-back. Right now he has a fairly big claim on that championship points grab. We'll touch on the other championship point situation here later on in this broadcast, but I will tell you in confidence that Gregory Hovesen cannot seal the deal tonight, but he can get pretty dang close if I'm being brutally honest. But here we're running at Suzuka, and there I think is a lot of storylines heading into this race. There's plenty of storylines that we need to touch on throughout this, whether it be the track or whether it be the drivers that we'll see on track running here tonight. So Charles, the pass is off to you. Talk us through just some of the storylines that you'll be keeping an eye out for.
Yeah, so last week was kind of, as you look at the schedule, was kind of an aberration with it being Daytona. Of course, everybody was looking at it as, oh, this is a good practice race, so we'll take it kind of seriously. But it's really Hovesen and Domark out front, and then it's just a battle for who's going to finish third in every race, right? So we've got Barrera's had some good runs. Staropoli is in like his second race now. He looked like he's got some really good pace in the car, and then you've got so many others, Jake Luther, and just kind of the list goes on. And it's just going to be, all right, who's going to be successful at this track and kind of lunge their way forward and get and try and get to the podium and to get those points to carry on to the rest of the season.
Do like how you mentioned Staropoli there, and we saw him make his series debut 2 weeks ago at Daytona, and what a debut it was, but the results definitely didn't reflect how good of a job he did there. He was running up towards the front, was running in net P1 after some strategy chicanery that all the drivers were pulling in that Daytona race. He was running in net P1 short field and had to save fuel in that last stint, but sadly a little bit of bump drafting went wrong between himself and Gregory Hovesen, and it ended in Staropoli hitting the wall, spinning, breaking his suspension, and taking himself out of the race, where he probably would have finished on the podium if he actually saw the checkered flag. So I'm glad that Staropoli is here with us tonight. We're following him coming through Spoon right now. He's currently in P3 in this qualifying session. A beautiful drift there, going onto the back straightaway, which I think is going to be a source of action here. I think I might be a little bit biased here because I'm off the back of a Radical broadcast here this past Friday, where we saw plenty of drivers going for some pretty bold moves going into 130R. I don't think we're going to see that here in these GT3 cars, but I think we are going to see plenty of drivers trying to slipstream past each other going through there, trying to go for a move into 130R. I don't think it's likely, but going for a move into that chicane is probably going to happen. So I think there's plenty of opportunities for these drivers to overtake, but there's also plenty of drivers that are going to make mistakes here tonight. Do you think this race is going to be one more of attrition, or do you think these drivers are just going to keep it clean?
I'm going to lean because of my history with this track. I'm going to lean toward attrition because it's a very technical track. It's one of the most, to be fair, it's one of the most difficult circuits in iRacing as far as road course is concerned. It's just technical from start to finish. You do have a couple of good spots to draft. Obviously, we talked about the back stretch there with it's basically in two halves separated, by 130R. You've got the front stretch down the start-finish straight, which everybody will be trying to get in. But this track is just very difficult, and it treats every car that we've got on the track differently, right? So every car has its pluses and its minuses, and this track will pick your minuses out very, very quickly. So they're going to have to be very careful. And I think attrition's probably going to be the name of the game. But with the iRacing changes to the off-track physics, I haven't driven it since then. So maybe that helps out. We get a couple, maybe some cars get saved as opposed to just ended up in the wall somewhere. So it'll be interesting to find out if that part of it's any different.
I think the main source of attrition is probably going to be on lap 1, with all these drivers being so close. Once we get a few laps on the board, I think all these drivers are obviously going to spread out quite a lot, but I think lap 1 is going to be a battle for survival. These races are 45 minutes long. There's a lot to play for, and these drivers need to be wary of trying to pick up those incident points, because we do have an incident point limit for these races. So if they hit about, I think it's 20, if I'm not mistaken. I'll take a look at my notes to fact check myself, but about 20 incidents, these drivers will occur some kind of penalty in race. So these drivers really need to keep wary of making contact with themselves, abusing those track limits, and just trying to keep it clean is what they need to do. Now, one driver keeping it clean coming through the Casio Triangle there is Simon Attrell, currently in P7 right now in the qualifying. Actually, he's pulled into the pits now, but that is a pretty good lap time from him. Pretty bad lap time from Justin Dive Bomber Barrera in P8. I was expecting him to be a little bit farther towards the front. Him running in P8 is not a good result from him in any sort of regard. He's involved in that P2 championship fight, so for him to be starting well farther down in the order is a little bit of a disappointment.
Yeah, it really is. He has been running up in the top 5. Maybe not getting those results every week, but definitely has the pace to be running up there. And so, yeah, you talked about the track limits. The first lap, even if the cars don't make contact with each other, you may end up with 3x just after the first lap because of the way the track is with cold tires. So you have to be very careful. Obviously, it's a very much of a timing, as far as your brakes and your downshifts going in through turn 1, through the S's, and then the Degnars. You just have to be almost inch perfect to get clear through there without getting an off track. And there's just spots like that all over the track. So it's good. Like I said, it's going to be very interesting to watch. We may have a couple of cars have to come in and take drive-throughs because of incident points. So that'll be another factor in the race.
I think this track is probably going to be the most challenging for these drivers. I think the idea of attrition, even with this fairly small field, only 10 drivers, I think that'll definitely ring true with all these drivers that are fairly evenly matched pace-wise. And the man at the top of the leaderboard here in this qualifying session is Gregory Hovis. Qualifying is at its closing stages. You can see there, I believe that was Staropoli there coming out of the hairpin. So we don't have, it really is just we're waiting for some of these drivers to to cross the line to end this qualifying session. Then we'll get the starting grid for you soon. But I think what I'll do is touch on the Drivers' Championship situation. Now, as I said, Gregory Hoverson, he's just been dominant so far in this series ever since we started covering this here on Apex Racing TV. He's only lost one race, and that was because he let his teammate win and let his teammate by at the end of the Watkins Glen season finale last season. So he's just been so dominant in this series. Currently at 105 championship points right now, 38 ahead of Justin Hall in P2. I believe that's Justin Barrera in P3. I'll take a look at my I'll fact check myself here, but I believe I might have had something written down incorrectly in my notes here, but still a massive gap between P1 and P2, 38 points. You can get a max of 35 in a single race. So the fact that he has that kind of gap is incredibly big buffer. So right now the fight is for that P2 championship result. It's actually Barrera there in P2. So I apologize for me misspeaking there. So Justin Barrera in P2, and then Kyle Domark, his Delta Sport teammate, is in P3. But as I've been blabbering about the championship results, we're going to get the qualifying results here in a few moments time and your starting grid. And as we mentioned, it's Gregory Hoverson taking the win. Not taking the win. He might take the win. He's been very dominant. He will start this race in first. Kyle Domark, his teammates, will be in P2. Fairly big gap between the two of them. Jake Luther in P3. Eric Starpoli in fourth. Spencer Retzma in fifth. And then Sammy Hendricks rounding out the front three rows. Simon Adderall in P7. Justin Barrera in P8. And Mitch Buenaventura. I apologize for calling him Michelle. That may be his sister's name. He will be in P9. That's Matthew Pern in P10. And then Shane Brown, who I don't believe will be joining us. He did not say a qualifying time. He will be starting in P11 if he takes a green, which I think is a little bit iffy. So fairly short field, but I don't think this race is going to be short on action. What do you think?
Oh no, I completely agree with that. Yeah, it's Hoverson, obviously. If we go by qualifying results, he's basically a second a lap faster than everybody else on track. So it's basically his race to lose. Obviously, this track will catch you out if you're not paying attention. So if he gets lax during the course of this race, weird things have happened. So yeah, but the pack between like P2 and P8 was about a second gap, so that should be some really quality racing again. So we'll see how the rest of the podium and the rest of the grid ends up finishing.
There you can see the beautiful shot there of, I believe that's Steve Myers and Dale Jr. on the very pixelated, as you can see the polygons very visible there on the Ferris wheel in the infield of this track with the Coca-Cola Zero Sugar, I believe. Yeah, that is a Coca-Cola Zero branding on there. That is not a sponsor here of Apex Racing TV, but SDK is, as you can see all the beautiful graphics that you'll see here in a few moments time, along with these great cars, beautiful paint schemes that we have here in this series. And they're going to take the green flag here in a few moments time. The field now is in the hands of your pole sitters right now. You can see the front row there of the Delta Sport teammates fairly close there, and he has already stepped on, has Gregory Hoverson. He's already pulling in front of his teammate. It looked like they're going to run each other into the grass there. A little bit of blinking there. That might be a little bit of a glitch on our end, maybe some kind of connection issues for Kyle Domark already, but no connection issues of the sort for Gregory Hoverson right now, running in a very good race. And you can see now Kyle Domark hasn't, okay, he blinked in there just as I was going to say that. He blinked out for quite some time. Some sort of connection issue, which might throw a bit of a wrench in the works of that fight between himself and the P3 runner right now. That is your P3 runner of Jake Luther there. So right now, all the field making it through clean. I think they heard our warnings and heaved those warnings of lap one possibly being a source of drama. Ooh, you can see a little bit of drama there. I was going to say how everyone kept single file, but there, that was Kyle Domark running wide, coming out of the corner, doing a little bit of rally action, but he managed to rejoin the track, but did lose that position there to Jake Luther. So besides Domark going off, it's been fairly clean thus far, a lot cleaner than I was expecting.
Yeah, the smaller field helped, but yeah, that's we talked about that just a little bit. Is its first lap's very crucial. You have to be very patient with the car as the tires get warmed up. And Domark just ran a little wide, and Luther had a good run out of the S's and was able to take advantage.
Right now, with all that going on, the Jake Luther being in the really the meat of the sandwich between the two Delta Sport drivers there. So I think what I have seen, I will be a little bit transparent here and say that I was listening into to a Twitch stream, because all these drivers, well, a lot of them stream their perspective. Simon Atwell does, who's currently putting together a pretty good race. You can see him running a little bit there in the midfield, but Gregory Hoveson streams his perspective of these races, and you can hear him and his teammate Kyle Domark really chatting their way through the race. So the fact that those two, which are really the dynamic duo of the series, the fact they're split up currently, I think puts Gregory Hoveson in a little bit of a vulnerable situation. He really needs to push that car to try and extend that gap. Right now, the gap between those two is about 0.37 of a second there, so fairly close right now between the two of them. You can see Domark actually dropping back a little bit. So I think maybe it's just a connection issues that might have rattled Domark's cage a little bit at the start of this race, but I think he might be struggling with pace compared to the two drivers up at the front of him. We'll see what happens between now and the pit stop. So I think Kyle Domark's slowness is putting Gregory Hoveson at a little bit of a vulnerable spot with this race.
Yeah, I think you may be right. And for those who have done iRacing and have pretty stable connections, I I have had the issue where you blink, and so what we see one car blink. What the driver sees is nothing. All the cars are gone. So he's just basically on a clean track by himself, which, if you're in the middle of a race, has got to just really unnerve you. So it wouldn't surprise me that once the cars just all kind of reappear and you get a sight for all of them, now you have to kind of readjust where they all are in relation to you, and then you just basically start hoping that you don't have that happen again.
Fingers crossed this time by we're going to get some more representative lap times. Right now, fairly clean very early on into this race. As I said, I was going to mention as they went through the first few corners that there are no position changes besides Jake Luther and Kyle Domark swapping spots running in P2 and P3. It's been very clean thus far. Shane Brown, who you see running at the tail end of the field in P11, did not set a qualifying time, did not take the start of the race. He, I don't believe, will be joining us here in tonight's race, but really everyone else is on track. The 10 cars that we have here on track currently right now being tailed by Matthew Pern. We're following him coming through 130R in that Audi R8. I think right now, with how small the field is, it's still fairly close between the whole field. They're not spread out by quite a lot. As we see some battling here. Domark losing another spot there. Might have had some kind of mistake coming out of Casio Triangle, but Kyle Domark dropping back more. He might be dropping back more here as Spencer Retsma trying to get a move done on him heading into turn 1, and does that successfully. So Kyle Domark dropping back like a rock right now. Maybe there's some sort of blink. We may have to take a look at a replay to see what in the world happened to him, because this is very staggering and upsetting for Domark.
Yeah, so just coming down here in the Casio Triangle. Don't see anything yet. Oh, wow. I wonder if he maybe got to slow down, maybe just cut too much of the corner and had to kind of lift off. Star Poli was able to get through. We'll get another look from here. Oh no, no!
Oh,
He hooked the curb on exit, and it just kind of pulled the car around. And so it was a great catch just to keep the car from looping and potentially getting some other cars involved in it. So good catch by him. But yeah, definitely slowed his exit down and is able to allow Star Poli and Retsma to get by.
that was not a slowdown. That was a code brown that he just had. That was incredibly close there, especially with the close relationship he had to the pit wall there. That could have ended in absolute tears there for Kyle Domark, and I apologize for that absolutely terrible pun that I just laid out. But right now, all these drivers just trying to tick away the laps. We're 3 laps in, about 5 minutes into this 45-minute race here. So I think what these drivers have to do is just... It's tough because all these drivers, you can always say like, oh yeah, they're trying to keep it clean, they're just trying to keep it on the road. I think usually whenever we say that, it ends in just all these drivers proving us wrong and battling very hard. But at this track where we've already seen some of the best in the series get caught out by low grip and real tricky nature of this circuit, I think this might be the time where it really rings true. I think all these drivers are going to take this first stint just as it is, try and tick the laps away and just bring these cars back to the pits in one piece. They do have a faster pair at their disposal, but they don't want to take that and ruin their strategy.
Yeah, absolutely. As you can see, Rennsport just kind of having a little small correction there as they rear end that Ferrari tried to go around on him. So yeah, and that's what I was saying is you can't sleep on this track. You have to be constantly running the proper line because just one little mistake, as you saw, Casio Triangle, not really that difficult, but he got a little wide on the exit, and then the car got hooked up on the curb and almost cost him the race, and did drop him back a couple spots. So you can't really rest while you're out here.
Yeah, no spot for a break really. Even going down the other straightaways, they aren't the straightest in the world, so you're turning pretty much throughout this entire racetrack. So all these drivers are just. I gotta imagine one thing. Definitely tires will burn out, but I think mental burnout might be a big factor with this race. Certainly Kyle Domark might be feeling a little bit of burnout here, being stuck behind Spencer Retsma. I think they're fairly evenly matched pace-wise, but I think mind games will play a pretty big role at a race like this and at a track like this where it's very tight, very twisty, and very technical. The mental aptitude that these drivers have to have and the mental confidence that they have to have is so important to keep these cars on track and keep them going up towards the front. So I think mental burnout is going to play a pretty big role in this race. So I can imagine all these drivers are taking their different strategies. Charles, if you were in this race, how do you think you would kind of manage how do you manage yourself throughout this race?
I think what you were saying is absolutely true. Is you don't want to make any. You want to be, like I said, you want to be very cognizant of your line. You want to make sure that you're hitting all your marks the way you need to. And you're not really so much worried about the cars that are around you. Obviously, you want to make sure that you don't run into anybody or anybody runs into you. So you are kind of checking your mirrors and keeping an eye on the car up front, but you're really more focused on just making your car work around the track. Especially, like I said, all these cars have their downsides, as we saw with the Lambo, not necessarily wanting to jump the curb and come back over. The Porsche, the Ferrari, the rear engine cars, if you go too hard on the brakes, I have a tendency to try to loop, as we saw that with Retsma, as he just got the rear end loose for that hard braking zone going into turn one and then turn two. And so you just have to be very aware of your driving first. And then you worry about the race that's going on everywhere else. Now, as we get closer to the end, that kind of flips once we get through the pit stop and the car's clean. Okay, now let's go racing and let's see if we can make up some positions.
I think all these drivers really need to see the bigger picture. Usually racing drivers just try and go forward all the time, just always chugging along at 100%. All these drivers are very smart in this series, and they realize that at a race like this where fairly small field, fairly small gaps, all these drivers have to just, there's so many things that come into this race. The tire management, the fuel management as well. We haven't even touched on that. The fuel is usually the big thing when it comes to these races. It varies with the pit stops because these drivers do have a pit stop to contend with that we'll be seeing in about 20 minutes time, as I can imagine, when most of the field will come into the pits. But the fuel management is pretty important, so maybe that's a reason why we're seeing Kyle Domark not really force the issue here, trying to get back past Spencer Retsma. I think he's realizing, hey, I'm in a good position right now. I'm picking up the slipstream with a Ferrari ahead of me. I'm just sitting here in the slipstream enjoying the nice fuel saving numbers. So I think the fuel saving might be a reason why all these drivers are staying fairly line astern right now.
I think so, and I think if I had my guess, I think Hoveson's also fuel saving, just based on his last lap was a 2-minute .3 versus Luther 59.93, so about 0.4 of a second slower. I think, based on his lap, his qualifying lap was 1:58.5, so he's about a second and a half off that pace. So it would not surprise me that he's not really pushing the car very hard. He is trying to manage fuel and tires. Because Suzuka is very very hard on the tires because of just the nature of the track. It's not a lot of elevation, but it's a lot of medium and high speed corners, and it will really abuse the tires if you let it.
Well, this track was originally built as a car and tire test track, so that could be the the main thing that influences these drivers' strategies when it comes to this race, just trying to save their tires and save up their cars and save up their minds as well. I mean, we've talked about management all throughout this race, and usually when it comes to some of these races, the fuel management and tire management is important, but with this, really just all kinds of management. You have to manage yourself so much in this race. So I think that will be something that plays a massive role in this race right now. Fairly spread out in the field, if I'm being brutally honest right now, about 0.8 of a second between Gregory Hoveson and Jake Luther running in P2. Luther in a very good spot to try and reclaim that front three position there in the championship. I'll take a look at the championship points that you can see on s1racing.com if you want to check them out for yourself. But right now, Justin Hall is running P4 in the championship, actually 1 point behind Kyle Domark right now entering this race. So I think with the position he's running in right now, he will be in a very good spot to take the P3 spot. Actually, I think he might be able to take P2 because the driver running in P2 in the championship right now is Justin Dive Bomber Barrera, who hasn't pulled off a dive bomb yet. He's still running in P8 where he started, as not putting in very good lap time. Simon Atwell is starting to pull away in front of him. The gap is about 1 second between those two, and I think he will slowly fall into the crutches of Buenaventura there in P9. So I think it's tough. I think we've seen this before from Barrera. We've seen him struggle at these more technical racetracks where there's not a whole lot of heavy braking. I mean, that's where he gets his name Dive Bomber from, but at a track like this where there's no real heavy braking zones, I think this is really hurting his championship chances and aspirations.
Yeah, I think you may be right. It's like I said, yeah, it seems like the BMW, it was really good on the brakes. You could really get hard on the brakes and stop the car. And also really good with curbs, just eats the curbs up. It doesn't really unsettle the car very much. Obviously a lot of good power, very strong front engine car. And where it seems to suffer a lot is on the tires. And I think maybe that might play an issue with his pace tonight. Just because the BMW and the Merc seem like they want to eat the front tires up a lot easier than the other cars, eat the rears up. So he may be having to just kind of manage that a little bit and maybe can't really push as hard as he would like to.
Yeah, I gotta imagine that's very restraining for these drivers, and I think with these fixed setups, some of these drivers are struggling. We're taking a look at a replay here of Simon heading into the spoon section here, so I think he might have had some off-track moments. We're riding with him coming into spoon, drifting a little bit wide, and yeah, a little bit of a interesting interpretation of track limits there, and I think it might have been two in a row here. Yep, there you go. So him picking up those incident points fairly quickly. The series founder might be regretting the decision to incur a penalty after 20 incident points after he just picked up a few very quick succession.
Yeah, and I just, we just talked about how Hoveson really hasn't done what he had a nice gap. It was like 0.4 of a second. The last 2 laps basically were the 2 fastest laps of the race, and he's just jumped out to a 2-second lead over 2 laps. So I think he maybe decided, you know what, I need to build a little gap to the cars behind, and then I could go back into managing everything a little more closely.
He still has the fastest lap of the race, as you can see there, at a 59.0, so just miles ahead of everyone else. You can see 0.8 of a second faster than everyone else's fastest lap. Gregory Hoveson, it's kind of scary how well he's been able to perform in this series. Obviously, your Season 2 champion right now, leading your championship points right now in Season 3, and really, unless something goes cataclysmically wrong, if I can spit my words out here, if something doesn't go bad for him in this race and the next 2 races of the season, he pretty much has Season 3 championship on lock. He's won all the races thus far this season. We're already halfway through this Season 3 here, and right now, as I said at the start of the broadcast, he doesn't have the opportunity to lock it up here, but he has a very good opportunity to get quite close. As I said, 38-point gap in the championship entering this race, and the driver he was ahead of with 38 points was Barrera, who's now in P8, so that gap is going to increase quite dramatically after this. So I think, oh man, really the fight is between P2, and I think it's I mean, last season we saw Kyle Domark really step into the series, driving for Delta Sport, and him along with Gregory Hoveson being teammates, they just staked their claim on this series, won pretty much everything there was, won all the races from that season. Hoveson at 5, Domark at 1 after a little bit of team orders at the end of that race. This season's been different, though. There's really been no clear runner in P2. Jake Luther's gotten some good results here, and Domark's gotten some good results, as has Barrera, but I think there's a new challenger in the fold right now. You can see Starpoli is incredibly close there to Luther. The gap is about a car length between the two of them going down through the S's here, so I think the topsy-turvy nature of that P2 fight may continue here, because I think Starpoli is going to be within a real good shot of overtaking Luther here before the end of this first stint.
Yeah, absolutely. He definitely looks like he's got some pace in the car. It looks like he's able to match Luther's laps, which is kind of what we saw last week at Daytona. It looked like he has really good pace. So yeah, it's just a matter of, you've got to pick your spot here. You just can't, you can't just make a dive here into the hairpin and expect to come out in one piece on the other side. You really have to plan it in advance. You have to kind of know what the car in front is, what he normally tries to do, and then kind of work against that. So, and it may be just smart enough at this point that with 18 or almost 18 minutes into the race, it's just waiting and trying to just save fuel and maybe just do a short pit stop, and get out of the pits in front of him.
One thing that was very striking to me about the Daytona race that we had last time out with the series is the fact that we had a very unique pit stop strategy. Usually in these races, we see these drivers pit right after, well, no, I wouldn't say right after, around, if I had to boil it down, I'd probably say between like the minute 28 mark and probably the minute 38. So in that 10-minute stint is usually when we see a lot of drivers coming into the pits. Daytona was completely different, albeit it's a completely different track from all the broadcasts that we've done with this series thus far here on Apex Racing TV. And we also thank all the viewers tuning into this broadcast here on Apex right now. But it was just such a different race, and it led to such different pit strategies. So do you think we'll see some more like off the wall and sort of abstract pit strategies here, or do you think these drivers are going to fall back into the norm?
Yeah, no, I think based on the season tracks, I don't think this is one of those tracks where you want to try and do an undercut, especially with a light field, and they're already kind of spread out pretty well. So it's not like you can just get, and it's not a draft track, right? There's a couple places where you'll get a couple of tenths riding behind the car, but for the most part, it's not really a draft track. So this is probably not one of those that you can say, I'm going to do an undercut, get in clean air, and just try and run fast laps, because I think that most of the guys are already really in clean air. I don't think they're really being held up by anybody. So I don't think it makes a lot of sense to do that. I mean, there might be somebody try it, because you just never know. It's a gamble. But when you're maybe 5th or 6th in points, maybe that gamble pays off. And if nothing else, then you really haven't lost just too much, right? So, I mean, it's possible, but it just doesn't seem like that's the right strategy tonight.
I really think that if any of these drivers are going to try and go for an off-the-wall strategy, it has to be a driver running farther behind, say, Justin Barrera right now, whose gap is about 11, coming up to 12 seconds between himself and Gregory Hoveson in P1. The drivers that are currently P1 and P2 in the championship entering this race spread out dramatically here on the racetrack so far. You can see that gap has increased massively between Hoveson and Luther, so the gaps are really increasing all throughout the field. Still fairly close here between Retsma and Domark, but now Hendricks has gone involved in that fight. They're fairly close, staying line of stern here, separated by about a second and a half now as they go down the start-finish straightaway here. But, I mean, we kind of mentioned it already when we were talking about the weird strategies with this, with what we had in Daytona 2 weeks ago compared to what we'll have here in Suzuka, which is a little bit more textbook. But we're rounding off the season with some very tight and twisty tracks. So really, Daytona was a big outlier with massive draft sections. Throughout the rest of the season, though, we had Canadian Tire to start the season off back in 2023. Feels like forever ago since the season started off. So we had that as a season opener, and then we went to, I think it was Hockenheim afterwards. Then we went to Daytona. Now we're here at Suzuka, and we're going to round off the season at Mugello, and then Bathurst will be the season finale. That's a race I'm really looking forward to. Has a little bit of features of both Daytona and here at Suzuka, so I think that'll be a pretty interesting race. We had a damn good show there last season with this series, so I think this is a pretty interesting question. Of all the tracks here, do you think Suzuka is the tight and twistiest that we visited and that we will be visiting this season, or do you think there's another mention of the other most challenging?
I think Bathurst. You know, that is the probably, you know, I said this is probably one of the most technical tracks on iRacing. That's probably the most dangerous track on iRacing because there's no room for error. You can't be offline. If you go offline, if you lock the tires, if you slide the front end of the car, you're in the wall, and that's just it. I mean, there's really no other. You know, you've got the two straights at the beginning of the end of the lap. You know, but everything else is you just have no room for error at all. You have to be inch perfect for 2/3 of the lap, and it's just, well, for me, it's impossible. I haven't been able to do it yet, but for even some of the higher rated drivers, it's a really difficult track. I think it's probably the most dangerous track in iRacing as far as just, you know, you don't have any room for error, and you'll just end up killing your car and ruining your race, and without even thinking about it. I will say this: go back to the pit stops for a minute. I think it was calling a race, and I don't know if it was me and you, Ron, if it was me and somebody else, but Barrera may want to try a strategy where he splits this race in half and pits now, and then takes tires, and maybe takes two, so that way he gets the free 2 tires because he's taken that amount of fuel to basically equalize the time it takes to do the 2 tire change. And maybe helps the car out for the latter half of the race. That would be a strategy that I think he could employ.
I think it's a strategy that he not only could employ, but I think he needs to employ with this race. Right now, just looking through my live timing screen, last time by, Justin Barrera said a 2-minute 0.89. I'm showing on my live timing screen here. We might have a bit more of a in-depth graphic here if we can get that pulled up. But that was the second slowest lap last time by. Thank you very much, Josh, for your quick work there at 2 minutes 0.895. So that was a fairly slow lap time. You can see the second slowest last time by, which for the driver who we usually see running at least in the top 5, occasionally running in the podium positions, that is fairly dreadful, if I'm being brutally honest. And you can see his pace has dropped off like a rock. You can see his fastest lap of the race was a 2-minute 0.011 there. So the fact that he's managed to lose about 0.7 of a second, even though we're only 12 laps into this race, only halfway through, the fact that it's dropped off that dramatically is, it's unfortunate to say, but it's gonna kill his championship hopes, I feel. I mean, the chances of him winning the championship, really anyone winning the championship, are fairly slim, to be honest, but I think this is really the death blow for a round like this.
Yeah, it's you know, that happens, and yeah, it's just, I don't know if it's if he's just not comfortable. You know, we talked about this being a fixed setup series, so maybe the BMW setup's just not very comfortable to him. It doesn't really kind of match his driving style for this track, and or it just may be the track itself, because like I said, it's a very difficult track to try and keep yourself on the right line. So yeah, not really sure, but yeah, he's definitely off pace. You know, if I was him, maybe I'd be thinking about the 2 tire stops. I don't know. I know that it would be left sides or right sides, but not front or back. They said, from talking with the drivers that I deal with daily, they said if you take the fronts or the backs on these cars, the balance goes away so quickly you just really can't recover it. So it would be, okay, do I take left side tires or right side tires? Which do I think is being hurt the worst?
And that has been a nice little thing, whether it be here on the S1 series or whether it be on the ARL GT3 trophy here on Apex. If you want to catch those broadcasts, you can tune here on Apex on Fridays. That's a pretty damn good series. I have the in-studio broadcast for that, so you can see David Sampson and Sam Fitzpatrick there and all their beautiful British glory there covering that series here on Fridays here on Apex Racing TV. But it's there's just so much that that can really mess with a driver's race, and there's so much that can help a driver's race as well. Right now, these two drivers are putting in some good drives. If this was a battle for the lead, I think we'd be a lot more closer to the edge of our seats right now. The gap is about 5 seconds between these two and Gregory Hoverson right now, and that gap is still increasing quite a lot. We've had some drama here. You can see Simon Adderall here. We're following him. I think this is in the run-up to the hairpin. Yes, it is here in the number 12 Audi heading into the corner. I think I saw a faint glimpse of this as we are following. Oh, yeah, a little bit of a kick out Tokyo drift action. It's nice that we're doing that at the other one race here in Japan on this schedule. He does a little bit of Tokyo drift action coming through the hairpin. I think I saw a tiny little glimpse of that as we were following Barrera, talking about how his race has gone up to this point and how strategy may help him or hurt him in this race. We'll just have to wait and see who's the first to bite when it comes to pit stops here. I think it's really tough. I think Staropoli will probably be the one that I have penned as the one that'll come into the pits first. I think he'll try and do some kind of bonkers off-the-wall strategy. He tried to do it at Daytona, and I think it would have worked very well for him if that incident didn't happen between himself and Gregory Hoverson. So I think he may be the first to take the bite at going into the pits. What do you think, Charles?
I mean, that would be a good strategy. I think just from sitting behind the guy, saving fuel, you go in and set the tone for the pit stop. Do a short pit, maybe the other guy gambles and maybe puts too much fuel in. So yeah, I don't think there's anything wrong with that. Plus, it gives him some clean air. So if Luther is holding him up, or if just kind of sitting behind the Porsche in front of him is causing his car to misbehave, then yeah, that's not a bad call at all.
One of the drivers that we thought were going to take a very early swing at going into the pits is Justin Barrera. We're following him heading into the hairpin here. I think this might have been small little bit of a slide here, maybe an off-track sort of incursion there. That was fairly slowly there. I think I could just see with the fairly weird line he took coming through that corner. I don't think there's any sort of confidence with him in that car. But as we were talking about, the Star Poli comes into the pit, so I think that was a fairly good bet that he was going to try and do some off-the-wall bonker strategy, and he is the first to bite. So he is now trundling down pit lane at a snail's pace, and yep, you can see Barrera there in as well. So I think these two drivers, we'll see if they try and take some tires or they'll just take fuel here. I think Barrera at this point, he can't really, I mean, he's basically in no man's land, so I wouldn't really blame him if he took 4 tires just to try and do something different. You can see it's up on Jack, so I think he may be taking some tires here. We'll see how long he's stopped in the pits here. We'll probably get the other graphics now. We do actually have the graphics. You can tell I was always great whenever I had to take my vision exam to get my physical there. Actually, Barrera, a little bit of a quicker time in the box, so I think maybe he just took 2 tires, maybe he just took fuel there. That's a little bit shocking.
Yeah, at 12 seconds dead, basically. I'm not even sure you can get 2 tires on there. He might have only taken 1. Just maybe he's leaning on one of the 2 front tires and just says, you know what, let me go ahead and go ahead and take care of that and get it out of the way. But I don't know. Maybe it was 2. I think the pit stop or the tire change time is 26 seconds. I think for 4. So I think for 2, it's right around in that 11 to 12 race. So he might have got 2 on there.
Yeah, I mean, he just needs to try something different with how his race has gone thus far. He just needs, I mean, it's quite obvious, and I feel bad for kind of dunking on the guy, but we're just being brutally honest here, and he hasn't really shown a whole lot of pace throughout this race. He's now running in no man's land. Currently down in P10. He may gain some positions. We'll see how these 2 drivers fare in the clean air. We'll see if they can try and do it. Here's Gregory Hoverson. He's coming into the pits now, as has Luther. So the front 2 are now pulling into the pits. I think we're going to see the rest of the field flood in. I'm taking a look. Yeah, you can see there. That's Retsma, Domar, Hendricks. We might see Admiral come in here in a few moments time. Maybe he'll stay out trying to do something different. No, he doesn't. So all the drivers up towards the front, everyone is trying to cover. Maybe it was a great strategy call between Starpoli and Barrera there to come in a little bit on the early end, get out of the dirty air, and just manage to have a nice lap in clean air and try and pull a little bit of a gap. So we'll see how that gap is here. Helveson has already exited the pits. He's just dominant with this race right now. You can see Starpoli going down the start-finish straight away. I think he will leapfrog his way into second there quite comfortably ahead of Luther. you can see fairly close between himself there and Retsma, Luther and Retsma there as they exited the pits, and now Domark exits in P5, Hendricks in P6, and Admiral in P7. We'll see Barrera maintains that P8, and I think that gap might have actually increased a little bit between himself and Admiral. We'll see how that gap fares with him on much warmer tires, but it looked like that strategy might have helped out Staropoli there as he's managed to move up into P2.
Yeah, definitely, absolutely got him out in front of Luther, so he's running P2, and he's got a nice gap, 5 seconds. So, yeah. So Josh was sitting here telling us that, yeah, there was a 4.5 second difference from cone to cone between Staropoli and Luther, and that's basically the difference on the track.
Yeah, that is incredibly slow. I wonder, maybe there's some, I don't even think there's some sort of overshoot there in the pits, but I think there might have been something weird going on there. Maybe it was just Luther trying to push as hard as he could in that first stint, just trying to desperately stay ahead of Staropoli during that first stint, and that could have been the reason why he burned up his stuff a little bit more, had to take much more fuel than everyone else. So oh man, that is... it feels like forever. So this is his entry heading into the pits. Thank you very much, Josh, for this quick replay. So we're riding on board with Jake Luther entering the pits here, and we'll see maybe a little bit of kick-out action. This is a fairly difficult pit entry. It feels much like a street circuit here, trying to get a woad up there, going down pit lane, and I think, yeah, that was pretty textbook there. I think he might have overslowed just a little bit there, but nothing major. He's going to go into the pits here. We'll see. Maybe there's some sort of overshoot here. We'll keep an eye on it here. Oh, yeah, there you go. A little bit of an overshoot, just overshot by probably about 6 inches there, but that 6 inches cost him about 5.5 seconds out there on track.
Wow. Yeah, that's a big one. You got to be, that's the other part of this, is if you're in a race with a pit stop, you got to be clean, because that's the easiest way to lose one of these races, is just making a mistake on pit entry, whether it be speeding, or maybe smashing the wall, which I've done a few times, or missing your box when you get in there. So that's part of the whole practice regimen. Is you got to practice your pits as well to get those as clean as you can get them. You might not always be the fastest guy out there, but you don't want to give up 5 seconds of track space by just having a mistake on the pits.
I think Luther is going to be kicking himself over that mistake. He can see just barely there as he exited the Degners and headed under the bridge over the crossover here at the Suzuka track. A little bit of a unique feature with this track, a sort of like faux figure eight this track has there. You can just barely see Staropoli well farther off into the distance. I'll take a look at my live timing screen to see what laps they did last time by, but I think they're fairly evenly matched pace-wise. Yeah, Staropoli, actually, it's not a little bit misrepresentative there, because you can see that Luther that was his out lap there, but still, I think the gap is actually, we'll get a much better idea of how it is when these drivers cross the start-finish line here in a few moments' time, but I think Staropoli is still increasing that gap between himself and Luther, so I think it's just that mental aptitude, that mental confidence that we were talking about heading into this race, how these drivers just need to be so confident to get the most out of their cars after that small little mistake. I think it really... I think it definitely irked Luther, because he saw a great shot at he's still running in P3, but he saw a great shot at finishing this race in P2 and trying to get involved in that fight. He saw that really slip away from him, and if he makes one small little mistake here, he's going to be falling into the crutches of the drivers farther behind, but you can see it was actually 0.3 of a second quicker last time by than Staropoli's there, so I don't think he's really out for the count just yet, but I think with that pace and with the gap he has, I don't think he's going to be able to close that up between now and the end of the race. I don't think he should push it. If it were me, what do you think you would do, Charles?
Well, I think obviously the rule I always give my drivers is don't make a mistake trying to correct another mistake. So if you make a mistake on your pits, don't go out and burn your car up, push yourself too hard trying to make up for the time that you lost in the pit stop. You just have to run your pace, run your race. You know what the car is capable of. You know what you're capable of as a driver of the car. And you can add a little to it, but if you go, obviously, try making that 5 seconds up in the next 2 laps, you're going to end up making a mistake and wrecking the car. And so you don't want to go out and just, double up on your penalty that you made by doing something that is really out of character for you.
And I was just going to mention that there about how Staropoli, if he really tries to, Staropoli at this point, he's in a fairly comfortable position. He doesn't really have to push it, but that gap is decreasing quite a lot between himself and Luther. So I think Luther, he needs some we've probably said the word management about 50 to 60 times already in this broadcast, but it's just such a very important word when it comes to races at this track, managing the tires, managing the fuel, managing yourself, and manage not to hit the wall there. Oh, that was a massive moment there from Retsma. I think he nosed it into the barrier. I think Retsma will definitely be done for. We'll see if he decides to pull into the pits. Yep, he is done. I think Spencer Retsma just managed to crash out of that race, keep it off the road, don't get hit by anybody. That was a beautiful, quick change there from our producer Josh to switch to Domark right as that incident happened there. As we were talking about managing yourself mentally, Retsma makes a quick low mistake, beats himself on the curb, coming through 130R there on exit, and just ended in absolute tears. That car is definitely bent up again. Another replay, a longer replay here, heading into 130R is going to be another position there for the Delta Sport driver, and awful. This is not something that Spencer Retsma is going to look back on fondly. He had a fantastic race going for him, running fairly smoothly, but unfortunately the one mistake that he has all night is going to take him out of it. What a heartbreak.
Yeah, it is heartbreaking because we're at the end of the race here at this point, and he was running in P4, but he had Domark right behind him, pushing him as hard as he could go, and so maybe just carried a little too much through 130R. And not enough downforce to allow the rears to adhere to the track, and then around he came, and then have you seen that? If you've ever driven that car that track, you've seen that 100 times with the GT cars. It's just, if some of the cars you can set them up if you're running a lower wing. You have to lift going through there. If you're running more wing, you can take it flat, but you lose the top end. So it's a kind of a balancing act, and just kind of looked like that maybe didn't have enough wing in the car for the speed that he was trying to carry.
That is such a shame. That is just like looking at that incident, I can see the heartbreak just from his perspective. Putting together a great drive. I think with that, I'll take a look at my championship point standings here from this series, but he was a little bit farther back. He was running, entering this weekend, he was running in P8. I say weekend, we're running here on a Wednesday. Entering this Wednesday, he was in a decent position there. It was only about 15 points between himself and Justin Barrera, so him running firmly in the top 5 would have definitely helped him out in the championship, but it has helped out Kyle Domark right now. He's managed to gain one position that he lost in the early stages of this race. Really, that's the only sort of moving forward he's done at all in this race. You can see him now down 2 positions. The only drivers that have actually lost positions so far in this race is Kyle Domark and Spencer Retsma. You can see Retsma now down 5. He is in P10, had to tow back to the pits, and he is going to be hopelessly out of contention there, so he is going to be finishing this race in P10, barring some kind of massive disaster for a driver farther up the road. But Domark, I think he just got a little bit of life breathed into him, because with how good of a race that Staropoli is having. Actually, Staropoli, I don't think he'll get involved in that championship fight, considering that he just joined us without racing in the first 2 races of the season. I doubt very highly he will be involved in the championship fight unless he has some wins here between now and the end of the season, but it's still a very nice bone that Kyle Domark just got thrown in that championship fight there, right behind this man Gregory Ovison.
Yeah, definitely. That's that's the whole thing. Is the championship is not so much about being the fastest car on track. It's about being the most consistent driver on track and getting good results every week in and week out. And so that's definitely helpful to him. Obviously, with Retsma crashing out, and with Barrera down the order, he's now up to 7th. But I think Luther also missed a race somewhere in there as well. And then Staropoli obviously not here for the first 2 rounds. It's going to be, I don't think he's going to be in contention, barring Ovison maybe breaking a leg or something in real life. I don't think Star Poly's gonna be contingent for the championship. So yeah, that's a big bump for Domart.
That may be a very funny line, and hopefully it doesn't turn into the most unfortunate commentator's jinx ever.
God.
Spencer Retzma,
Please don't.
the fingers crossed. Fingers crossed. Gregory Ovison doesn't break a leg. Otherwise, you might have some kind of like mental liability lawsuit or something like that on your way, Charles. But we were following Spencer Retzma. He has rejoined the track. Bless his heart. I mean, he's still down one lap. He's pretty much entirely out of the race here, but still the fact that he's rejoined the race is proving that all these drivers are racers. All these drivers love racing hard, and they love being part of good racing. And speaking of good racing, if you'd like to stay up to date of all the stuff going on here on Apex Racing TV, you know what to do. If you've used YouTube for about 5 minutes, we've got stuff all around the clock here on Apex. We've got racing action, whether it be GT action through this series and not the S1, this is the series you're watching now, the ARL GT3 trophy. That's always on Fridays here at 2:30 p.m. Eastern. I'm not sure what time it is Pacific. Our producer John, I think that'll be 11:30 Pacific. That I think that'll be.
That's right.
Yeah, I think that's how it works. So 11:30 a.m. Pacific. My apologies if you want to tune into that broadcast. And also the Rennsport World Challenge here on Mondays. That's always a good series. I do the officiating for that, so fingers crossed. We have some pretty clean races there. That's always a good season. And action-packed racing thus far. They had a fantastic season opener 2 weeks ago, as well as the Rennsport Touring Car Cup that runs in conjunction with that series. Always good racing from the boys at Extreme Scoring, putting on great racing week after week here on Mondays here on Apex Racing TV. And if you're in the mood for some radical racing, they just had their race here last week at Suzuka. They're going to be running at Oldham Park this week, so you can tune into that broadcast here on Apex. On Fridays, we've got stuff all around the clock here, and the S1 series is one of them. Speaking of the clock, I think the time is about to run out on the clock. I'll take a look at my live timing. Yeah, you can see 42.5 minutes now we're into this race, so we don't have much time. I believe these drivers are on the 2 to go. They're going to be picking up the white flag this time by, and barring a major disaster, I think it's going to be pretty good for Gregory Ovison to take the win, and I think that gap has decreased even more between Starpoli and Luther, but still 3 seconds. I think it's fairly comfortable right now. So what do you think are your takeaways from this race thus far?
Yeah, I mean, I think that I'll give a shout out to the drivers, because this is, like I said, it's a very technical track, and I think with the exception of the one Ritzma issue that he had, everybody's done a really good job. I mean, it's been a very clean race. We haven't had any kind of issues, and they were running pretty much nose to tail for the first, 15 minutes or so. And so, yeah, it was, I think everybody's done a really good job managing the track and managing themselves in the car. So, yeah, it was not necessarily an exciting race with tons and tons of passes, but it was a very clean race, and sometimes that's as good as anything else.
Very clean, very respectful in the racing that we have seen thus far in all these drivers. It's nice to have some strategic racing. You know, you can have some just guts out, balls to the wall racing from start to finish, but you can also have races which are a bit more relaxed here, where these drivers just try and take away the laps, put together methodically run races instead of just hard run races. So all these drivers are taking it clean, not a whole lot of incidents thus far. This man has been flawless so far this season, so far this series, and so far this race as well. Gregory Ovison is going to be taking the white flag this time by. It's one more lap around for the Delta Sport driver, who, as I hinted at the start of this broadcast, he won't be able to seal the deal here with the championship here tonight, but I think with this win, he'll pretty much have one hand wrapped around it. The important number here is 70. That's the amount of points that these drivers, that will be left up for these drivers to grab, the maximum amount of points that these drivers can grab in the final 2 races of this season. So I think all the drivers that are going to be north of that gap will be just entirely out of championship contention. And even so, I'm not sure. We won't be able to get the championship point standings up for you, so we will definitely touch on that when the series comes back here in 2 weeks' time on February 7th. That'll be a fantastic race there at Mugello. That's going to be a pretty good race as far as I'm concerned, but we'll definitely have to touch on the championship point standings. But I think Mugello is definitely going to see the crowning of a new champion, but right now, Gregory Ovison right now putting in a drive of the champion. What do you think, Charles?
Yeah, I think you're absolutely right. I think that it's just is pretty much academic at this point with the victory today. He may just have to just get the base points for the last couple of races to clinch the championship, and obviously he's been stellar from start to finish.
Stellar indeed, and a little bit of an interesting interpretation of track limits. I think it was actually good there. He kept at least 2 tires on that curb there, so just a professional at work using the track limits to their advantage. Hey, they paid for the whole track, they're going to use the whole track. Gregory Hoveson has used it to an absolute beauty. Now he's going to enter 130R for the final time. Then he's going to go hard on the brakes, trying to woe up that Lamborghini of his to go into the Casio triangle for one last time. And after he negotiates these few corners and these few curbs, he's going to be taking the checkered flag yet again this season for the 4th time in a row with the season, and for one of the many times of this series. It's going to be Gregory Hoveson taking the win here in the S1 Racing GT3 Sprint Series. A very commanding win, a massive gap between himself and Starpoli. You can see Starpoli is about to cross the line now, so you can see massive gap between the two of them. Spencer Retzma finishes in between the two of them, multiple laps down after that incident he had late on there. You can see Jake Luther finishing a little bit further behind. The gap actually decreased between himself and Starpoli quite a lot in the late stages, so those two round out your podium in P2 and P3 there. So I think actually Starpoli running a little bit slow. Maybe he has a little bit of a fuel issue for all we know. I mean, he took the short fill strategy and tried to make it work at Daytona. Maybe tried to make it work here in Suzuka, and actually worked out quite well for him as he saw the checkered flag in a pretty good position. So all the drivers crossing the line now, and fairly clean race, a lot cleaner than we were expecting. That's for damn sure.
Yeah, absolutely. Like I said, they did a great job. This is not like a very difficult track. Very technical circuit, and everybody did a great job just managing the car, and everybody kept it clean. Like I said, we only had the one real incident, but it was a single incident, and he's exiting stage right there, and it was a good race, and so I can't wait to see what we get next week at Mugello.
Yeah, that is going to be a pretty good race. I haven't really covered. I think that'll actually be the first race that I broadcast from the virtual version of Mugello here in iRacing. Was able to purchase that track here in iRacing a few weeks ago, and I've just loved driving on it so far. A little bit tricky in some open wheeler cars, but still pretty excellent track. I'm sure a lot of the drivers from this series are going to be enjoying it when the series rocks up to there in 2 weeks' time on February the 7th. Same time here, 9:10 Eastern, 6:10 Pacific here on Apex Racing TV. If you'd like to tune into that broadcast, that I think is going to be a pretty good show. Start off the final 2 races of the season. It'll be February the 7th at Mugello, and then another 2-week break, and then we'll round off the season on February 21st at Bathurst. That's going to be a pretty good race. We still have, I don't think we're going to have much to decide when it comes to the championship when we hit that final race of the season. Oh, I think we might see, okay. I thought we were going to see some backstretch burnouts. I've never seen that before here at this track, but oh man, it's I feel like we've been disselling it. I think we've been underselling it, I think would be the correct technical term to describe it. The battle for P2 in the championship is incredibly close. I'll bring up the championship points again, obviously now out of date after the results that we had, but after the other results that we had through the first half of the season, the gap between Justin Barrera in P2 going all the way back to Santander de Hinza, who did not join us here tonight, in P10 was fairly close. It was less than 30 points separate, actually a little bit more. It was 31 points, my apologies, separating P2 and P10 in the championship. So really there's just so much left to play for when it comes to the series. So even though Gregory Hoveson looks like he's running away with the championship, there's still a lot to decide. So you think who's your favorite for that P2 championship fight? That's maybe a little bit of a loaded question.
Yeah, I think right now from what I'm seeing, it kind of looks like Luther and Domark seem like their own pace. Obviously, Starapoli is going to do everything he can to spoil that party. So obviously, the more points he can get, the closer he can climb up to the top of the order. I think we've decided that he's not in contention for the championship, but you never can tell. Podium may still be in play for him. He's just got to string together some very, very high finishes. So, but yeah, I'm thinking Luther and Domark are probably the two odds on. If Barrera comes back into good form, next week at Mugello. You know, he's still got obviously got a really good opportunity.
I honestly think if I were a betting man, which Apex Racing TV does not support sports betting in any way, shape, or form. I don't even know if it's legal in the UK, but if I were a betting man, I think I would put my money on Jake Luther. He's put together a very consistent season thus far and finishes this race in P3. We're going to get the other race results here in a few moments' time from a very a much cleaner race than we were expecting here from the S1 Racing GT3 Sprint Series here at Suzuka, and a fairly short field as well. Gregory Ovison takes a win, 10.5 seconds ahead of Eric Staropoli there in P2. Jake Luther runs at the podium in P3. Kyle Domark finishes this race in P4. Very tough race for him. He finishes 17.698 seconds back of his Delta Sport teammate. That's Sammy Hendricks having a fairly quiet race. We didn't mention him at all throughout this broadcast. I feel he finishes in a pretty good P5 for him. That's Simon Atwell, the series founder, finishing this race in P6. Justin Barrera finishing in P7. He only gained one position from the start to the finish and really had a just brutal race from his perspective. He finishes just barely ahead of Buenaventura. The gap between those two was about a second by the time they hit the finish of this race. Matthew Pern was fairly quiet at the back of the pack in the 007 car. He finishes this race in P9. Then Spencer Retzma with that crash very late on. That'll definitely sting him. He finishes about a lap down in this race. And Shane Brown finishing in P11. I can't really say he finished. He did not take the start of this race. So that is your 10 cars that actually took part in the race, 11 that were entered here tonight. So fairly clean. We were expecting it to be dramatic, but wasn't really the case. So Charles, what are your takeaways from this race here at Suzuka tonight?
Yeah, I think you absolutely said everything. It wasn't a dramatic race. It was a good, clean, consistent race. So yeah, it's not, you know, it was a great result by Hoveson, obviously still on form. The battle for P2 just continues to heat up, and that'll be the main talking point probably going forward for the rest of the season.
And it will heat up 2 weeks' time at Mugello. That's going to be, I think, a similar race to what we had here. It's a little bit twisty, has those S sections, and has those very twisty and technical parts that these drivers have to master if they want to get the most out of their race cars. So what do you think we should expect from the race in Mugello in 2 weeks' time?
Well, I wish you wouldn't have asked me that, Ron, because I haven't even bought the track yet. So you know, once again, I think it's, you know, these guys are going to get themselves prepared because obviously it's a little bit different. So, you know, obviously it's new track for everybody. So yeah, they may have went out and ran some laps on it, but it could be that some of them were, you know, like me and don't necessarily buy the track as soon as it comes out. So it may be a little bit of more of a level playing field through the entire order because it's a little bit of an unknown.
It is definitely an unknown quantity, and I will say when the series and all the drivers were convening to figure out what the schedule was going to be, all of them really voted for Mugello. So I think these drivers were just excited to have a new track, a very highbrow track. Hosted Formula One a few years ago during the pandemic season of 2020, put on a pretty dramatic race where they had 2 red flags. We may see that kind of drama convert here in the sim with these GT3 machineries. We'll just have to wait and see. Now, as I said, we're officially 2/3 of the way through this season, but we still have much more to come from this series in the final 2 races, including the likely crowning of a champion in the next race, and that probably will be Gregory Hoveson. My luck, I probably just pulled off the worst commentator's jinx ever recorded here in the history of broadcasting. Speaking of him possibly crowning himself as champion in the next race of the season, you'll see us again here on Apex Racing TV on February the 7th, same time, same place, with the same drivers, putting on good shows race after race. So I think that just about does it here from this broadcast here at Suzuka. We'll be trading in the sushi for risotto here with the S1 series as they head up to Mugello, and that's going to be a pretty good race, but we have to have a 2-week break until then. So for myself, Ron Mullins, Charles Bichelle joining me in the commentary booth, and Josh Wilkie working all the cameras in the virtual production hauler, I say thank you all so much for watching and have a great rest of your night.
Are you struggling for consistency in your sim racing? Does your iRating look like a roller coaster? If so, we have good news for you. The way to get more consistent is to first understand what you're doing differently than the professionals. And VRS is the answer. With our competitive subscription, you will have the telemetry, setups, tutorials, and everything else you need to fully analyze your driving. Our data packs and the ability to compare your driving with the best in the world will show you exactly where to adjust your inputs, change your driving line, and shave seconds off of your lap times. And our powerful and precise Direct Force Pro wheelbase and precision pedals are being used by some of the world's best drivers. All these champions agree that VRS hardware is not just the best on the market, it's also priced well below the competition. So if you're looking to upgrade to direct drive and the best pedals in sim racing, VRS is your answer. If you want to get better, get faster, and make it happen sooner rather than later, you owe it to yourself to find out why so many people are switching to VRS. You'll be so glad that you did. Visit www.virtualracingschool.com and learn why the best use VRS.